Hi everyone, it's Laura Radulovich here with the Ferrari Home Group and Keller Williams Classic Properties. Today I'm joined by Brian Heinmiller from Guaranteed Rate, someone that I go to for a lot of questions related to anything lending. Thank you for joining me today, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Laura.
Great. So things are crazy right now, as you're seeing just as much as us, and wanted to talk to you about that a little bit. So what kind of things are you seeing when you get a client that gets under contract and themselves or their agent are sending you an executed contract? What are you seeing that you didn't see 6 months ago, a year ago, or heck, even a month ago?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, it's obviously an unprecedented market. Things that we've been seeing lately that really I've never seen before. Borrowers and buyers are waiving remedy. So, might have an inspection done, but agreeing in advance not to ask for any repairs.
Yeah.
Certainly, I've been seeing some buyers that are actually paying closing costs for the seller,
Okay.
which is pretty unique. And another thing too is I've been seeing some kind of extreme delayed occupancy. So what that means is basically, for a seller, a really important thing is they might want to keep the house for, a couple months post closing. And so for them, the most important thing is to find a buyer who's willing to allow that.
Sure.
That's just certainly a few things that we've seen.
Yeah. So, and one of the other things, which is why we're talking today, is related to appraisals.
Mhm.
Because as prices go up so crazy, I know that I've written 20,000, 30,000 over a list price, which is crazy. The appraisals aren't really keeping up with those rising prices, um, because an appraiser can only look at facts and data from 6 months. They can't look at supply and demand. So, you know, comment on what you can related to appraisals and how you've seen appraisals maybe done a little bit differently or results coming back a little bit differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. So, an appraiser, their job is to establish a value, but all they look at is, 6 months of comparable home sale data in the area of the subject property. So even though a home has 20 offers, 30 offers, they're not able to use that kind of as a contributing factor to the value, which in reality, if 30 people are all willing to pay 20,000 above the list price, that's a pretty good indication of the real value of the home.
Yeah.
But the appraiser just can't use that. Um,
Yeah.
and so, that makes it challenging, especially in an environment where we have, kind of limited supply and such a high demand.
Yeah. I know that that's like the first thing that you learn when you go to school to get your real estate license. When you talk about value of a house, it's what is someone willing to pay for it. That is what true value is. But right now, that's not always necessarily the case. So we're also helping our buyers or encouraging them to kind of make up for some of that gap if the house would not appraise. So for example, a house was listed at 300. I got a buyer in contract at 320, so 20 over list price, but the appraiser only thinks it's well worth 300. So what can we do, or what can buyers do from a lending perspective to help them in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest, the most effective strategy right now is for buyers to offer what's called an appraisal gap. And an appraisal gap, all it is the buyer agreeing in advance to make up for a certain amount of an appraisal shortfall. So, as an example, if a home is in contract for $100,000 and there's a $5,000 appraisal gap in place, and the appraisal comes in at 95,000, which would be $5,000 short of the purchase price, then that buyer who'd agreed in advance for a $5,000 gap will have already agreed to move forward without any change to the purchase price. And so if you think about sellers, we just talked about they're getting 30 offers, they're getting 40 offers. They're nervous about the appraisal, period. That is their biggest concern. And so any assurance that buyers can provide in advance, that's obviously going to be well received. And most often, that's going to be the winning offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been doing that with almost all of my offers I've been writing for buyers. What I think is helpful for you to help me explain to people watching, explain to my clients is, where does this money come from if the bank will only lend you what it appraises for? So how does that even work? Or does this have to come out of their deposit funds, or where does this $5,000 that we use in this scenario come from?
Well, the short answer is it depends. So if somebody's doing a kind of a minimal down payment scenario, they're just doing kind of 3 or 3.5%, and they have an appraisal gap and it comes in low, they're going to have to come out of pocket with those extra funds.
Okay.
However, if we have somebody who's maybe they're doing 30% down or 35% down, a $10,000 appraisal shortage most likely will not impact their terms at all. It's not going to impact their cash to close or their monthly payment or their interest rate. So, they're in a great position to be able to offer this type of assurance. They might even want to waive the appraisal contingency completely, which means no matter what the appraisal comes back at, they're willing to move forward.
Yeah. I've seen this a few times. Definitely not everyone qualifies for this, but this is a topic I wanted to discuss. People are waiving appraisals, which sounds crazy. So how in the world are you, a lender, able to waive an appraisal?
Good question. So for conventional financing, if a buyer is doing 20% down or more, they are potentially eligible to waive the appraisal completely. And so what that means is no appraisal has to be completed whatsoever. Now we have the ability to check that up front. So a buyer can go into a negotiating scenario understanding that, hey, this house is listed at 250, we know it's going to go over list by a substantial margin. I can go up to 275 without the need to even complete an appraisal at all. So obviously, from a seller's perspective, what an opportunity, no risk at all.
Yeah. That's the key. The key word is risk. And that's what I explain to my clients, both on the buy and sell side. So what the seller wants to see, especially if they're seeing 10, 15, 20 offers, which one is not only going to net them the most money, but what is going to be the least risky. And sometimes they're willing to forego a few $1,000s off the top to have the least amount of risk, knowing that, hey, we have this timeline set up, we're moving. We don't want to risk after putting this house back on the market and doing this all over again, especially now. So with that being said, and I've written a few offers that have waived the appraisal, how do you reassure someone? Because that's kind of scary.
Yeah. So obviously, in the event that we have a systematic waiver of the appraisal, that's obviously a pretty easy thing to communicate. There's no need to have an appraisal at all. But if we don't have the luxury of a true appraisal waiver on the lending side, what I tell clients a lot of times is, you have the means to support whatever the appraisal comes back at. If you're concerned about the value, there's 30 to 40 people trying to buy this house. So again, back to kind of what we talked about initially, just because the appraisal might not quite be at the level that you're willing to pay doesn't necessarily mean that the value isn't truly supported.
Sure. And I want to clarify what you were talking about too, because when we talk about waiving the appraisal that's on the contract, now if it's a financially strong buyer, they might get an appraisal waiver from the bank. So no appraisal happens at all. However,
Correct.
There is an option if the client doesn't qualify, or maybe the property doesn't qualify for that they still will need an appraisal, but what they're waiving in the contract is that appraisal contingency. So just to clarify,
Correct.
that's what you were talking about, that second round. The buyer can just choose to say, we're going to get it, and you know what, we're going to take a shot with how it comes back, and we're willing to pay what we agreed to on the contract, regardless of what the appraisal is.
Exactly. That's a good point for sure.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of want to wrap this up with, again, this is kind of crazy, not just kind of crazy. This is really crazy. And it's uncomfortable and it's a little scary for people, especially full-time home buyers. And, we don't have a crystal ball, and I wish I did, to know what what our home value is going to be like in 6 months from now and a year from now in Columbus. I feel like Central Ohio is a great place to invest your money in a home. And I think the values are there, even paying 10,000 over list price or 15 over list price. So anything else you can say to first timers, or maybe even people that haven't bought a home in 20 years that are just nervous with waiving all these things, I guess reassuring them that everybody's kind of doing it, but it'll be okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, first to your point about Central Ohio, I mean, people are still buying houses, obviously. There's still a ton of demand. A lot of industries here have, they're still going pretty strong. And rates are very low. So, affordability is still at all-time highs, even with rising house prices. So, for those two reasons, it's definitely still a good time to buy in Central Ohio. As far as assuring first time home buyers, when I talk to them and explain these are some things that you might need to do, my biggest thing is to show them what that actually means. If I do add a $5,000 appraisal gap, what's the worst case scenario? And I show them the actual numbers, and it's not as scary. They think, well, we can do that, but it's the fear of the unknown that is really the biggest thing to overcome. And so what I encourage first-time homebuyers to do is ask questions. If you're not comfortable, let's talk about it. And so that's the best way to certainly put them at ease and make sure that they're ready to buy.
Great. Thank you so much. Brian, if someone out there watching this needs a lender, haven't talked to anybody yet, how can they reach you?
Call or text 614-607-0471 or email brian.heinmiller@rate.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. And of course, if you have any questions about the home buying process, what's going on in this market, or whether you're just a seller wanting to know what you can get your house for, call me anytime, 502-445-5112 or laura@ferrarihomegroup.com. All right. Stay safe out there, everybody. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Laura.
Bye-bye.